plane went down across the river behind those hills there.
I don't see any smoke. Maybe he made it.
Yeah, don't count on it. We run patrol over there last night. It's rugged country.
One of the most commonly used military terms in popular culture is the word patrol. The word appears in dialogue and frequently in the titles of books, movies, and television episodes. As with many military concepts, snipers come to mind. Content creators like screenwriters or reenactment event organizers often use the word without truly understanding the actual technical military meaning, putting them in the trap of inadvertently using the terminology incorrectly. For example, this scene from Band of Brothers.
Battalion 1 on reconnaissance patrol. Crowd hunting.
All right, I'll go. Take these.
It goes by fast, but the dialogue is significant. The first character uses the term reconnaissance patrol,
Battalion 1 on reconnaissance patrol.
which he explains to mean as crowd hunting.
Crowd hunting.
All right, I'll go. Take these.
The Sergeant Martin character uses the term combat patrol.
Doc, it's a combat patrol. Why don't you stay back and keep your ass out of trouble, huh?
The terminology sounds military, but the words actually refer to different things. Reconnaissance patrols were small and used stealth to observe and avoid the enemy. Combat, or fighting patrols, were larger and intended to locate and engage specific enemy positions. The two types of patrols couldn't be more different, yet the screenwriter put these terms into the characters' mouths in the same breath. It's a minor error and doesn't detract from the story. This YouTube uploader, on the other hand, thought that the word patrol would best describe what is going on in this film, apparently on the assumption that a scene showing soldiers marching in formation would correctly be described by the term patrol. The most common perception of the word matches the dictionary definition of an armed force monitoring a specific geographical area. To the uninitiated, growing up on a diet of cop shows or episodes of Combat, it might seem like patrols had little structure. A sergeant points out a few city blocks or a portion of the front line and directs his men to go take a look.
Let's go.
In actual matter of fact, however, within the context of Second World War infantry units, patrolling was an important and frequent task which involved considerably more planning and coordination than works of fiction portray. Infantry battalions in the Second World War spent most of their time either in fixed positions or in reserve. When an infantry battalion was in the line, patrolling was a normal and constant activity. The term itself is a generic one, and there were actually a number of different types of patrols, which varied in terms of mission and composition. There were a lot of variations in battalion organization from country to country, and many changes as the war went on, but most battalions had the same basic structure. The smallest subunit was the infantry squad, called a section in the British armies, and consisting of 8 or 10 men at full strength. 3 sections made up a platoon, which in most armies consisted of about 35 or 40 men. 3 or 4 platoons made up a rifle company. An infantry battalion had 3 or 4 rifle companies, along with heavy weapons and administrative troops, somewhere between 800 and 1,000 troops in all when at full strength. Individual patrols were executed at the lowest levels, by sections and platoons, usually as part of an overall patrol plan by higher headquarters. An earlier video on this channel breaks down what a typical operations order looked like for a deliberate attack by an infantry company. Planning for a patrol was similar, though on a smaller scale. This pro forma comes from a British infantry training manual in 1944 and shows an example of a patrol plan for a 24-hour period. 3 battalions were grouped into a brigade, and this example shows a brigade-level patrol plan. The brigade major was the senior staff officer at a brigade headquarters, working in conjunction with the brigade commander, who received his orders from the division headquarters to which the brigade belonged. The brigade operations staff determined their patrol needs and communicated them to the battalions. Patrols were selected to carry out specific missions, which have an influence on future operations by the brigade. The pro forma outlines information necessary for planning patrols. Firstly, the nature of the patrol. We'll discuss the types of patrols later on. Objectives were related to the nature of the patrol. Tasks were the means in which the objectives were met. Timings were essential, as friendly units needed to be aware of the activities of neighboring forces to prevent confusion. The passage of friendly lines was a potentially dangerous activity. Specific routes were usually laid out for the same reason, so that friendly forces wouldn't be moving into or through each other without prior warning. Support could come from within the battalion in the form of heavy weapons or vehicles, or from brigade and divisional resources such as engineers, artillery, or tanks. The final portion of the pro forma was a deadline. These may have been arbitrary, but only to a point, since as mentioned, information returned would be essential for commanders planning future operations, and their understanding of terrain, ground conditions, enemy force strength and identification, etc., would be heavily informed by these patrols. The most common type of patrol was the reconnaissance patrol. These were done to gain specific information, and one source writing about the fighting in Normandy calculated that about 3 in 4 patrols executed by British infantry battalions were recce patrols, as the British called them, or recon patrols in American terminology. Recce patrols were done to gather information by stealth rather than fighting. A typical mission would be to verify that a natural feature or building was occupied by the enemy, and if so, in what strength. This kind of information couldn't be obtained any other way. Patrols were considered more reliable than air photos or contact with civilian and resistance personnel. This information was then used to plan larger operations, such as a full-scale battalion attack. It could also be used to plan airstrikes or artillery and mortar fire to harass and interdict the enemy's logistics chain. The second main type of patrol was the fighting patrol, so called because it was expected the patrol might have to fight to accomplish its mission. While this mission might be obtaining information, as in a recce patrol, it could also involve destroying an enemy position. Strength of a fighting patrol varied from squad or section size up to an entire company. Larger fighting patrols were often rehearsed and supported by artillery and tanks. Fighting patrols were done for a number of reasons, but usually focused on the destruction of enemy posts that would interfere in future friendly operations. Sometimes the real aim was simply to be seen by the enemy, to keep them off guard, or as a deception as to where actual future operations might be carried out. Smaller patrols organized at the unit or subunit level included the contact or liaison patrol, which was a simple patrol sent out to establish physical contact with friendly troops on the unit's flank. A final type of patrol was the standing patrol, usually of section or platoon strength. These patrols would go forward of the main defensive line and occupy a protective position to warn of an impending enemy attack or to observe what the enemy was doing. Sometimes these standing patrols were used to shield the work of friendly engineers, such as laying, clearing, or retrieving landmines. On the pro forma shown earlier, there are examples of patrol tasks assigned to 3 battalions by brigade headquarters. Battalion A is ordered to conduct a reconnaissance of a farm to see if it is occupied by the enemy. The location is a 6-figure map reference. Specific tasks include remote observation from a nearby hill, and if no signs of the enemy can be discerned, to search the farm itself. The platoon is given 1 hour to conduct its work. The route is left to the patrol leader, but the patrol is not to go within 1,000 yards of the main road. Battalion B has no patrol tasks allocated. The unit has been informed that friendly artillery will be firing a harassment program in a specific grid square at a specific time. Battalion C has been ordered to mount a fighting patrol with the objective of clearing a gap in an enemy minefield. Physical features are used to identify the gap rather than just map references. In this case, the spot where 2 tracks meet bounds one side of the gap, and a junction of 2 tracks bounds the other. A second objective is to see if a second crossroad is mined. Specific timings and routes are given, and for this operation a detachment of engineers is supplied, along with a forward observation officer of a supporting artillery regiment with 1 battery on call. In other words, the battery will only fire missions called for by the forward observer. Para 7 notes that enemy interference will be resisted, meaning any enemy patrols or hostile forces are to be engaged by the patrol, supported by artillery as necessary, while the engineers do their work. British and Canadian patrolling in Normandy usually fell to the platoon commanders. Unlike the German army, platoon commanders were always junior officers in the British and American armies. The platoon commanders would select NCOs and men. Occasionally a more senior officer would lead a patrol. The battalion intelligence officer generally briefed the patrol commander, though the battalion commander was often involved as well. Likewise, the IO and often the CO would debrief the patrol leader at the conclusion of the mission to obtain a first-hand report. Patrol leaders that acquired reputations for obtaining good information were often picked on more often to lead patrols. In Normandy, for example, it was not unusual for Commonwealth patrol leaders to go out multiple times per day. The CAN-loan officers, Canadians on loan to the British Army, often arrived in their British battalions with reputations for patrolling already established, based solely on national reputation. Casualty statistics bear out the danger borne by junior officers in Normandy, no doubt partially a result of aggressive patrolling programs which the officers took a large and direct active part in. German wartime manuals present similar information on the conduct of patrols. The German squad in combat from the 1940-42 period notes that close-in reconnaissance by infantry patrols acted as a supplement to cavalry, cyclist, and armored car patrols. The German manual stresses that reconnaissance patrols must move cautiously and quietly, with frequent halts to observe and listen. Cunning and cleverness, a quick eye and resolute action, a love of adventure, and boldness are prerequisites for the successful execution of every reconnaissance mission. Patrol leaders were told to get as close to the enemy as possible without being seen, and to become well acquainted with the terrain, not only so that they could pass that information on, but because it might be necessary for them to guide others back through the same area later. The use of observation and listening posts is mentioned, usually ahead of the friendly front line, to provide increased security and advance notice, for example, watching the main exit of a village to warn of enemy movements. The German manual suggested liaison patrols consist of just 2 soldiers. The 47th London Division, serving in the UK, developed a battle drill manual in 1941, which spread to the Canadian Army by way of the Calgary Highlanders. The manual included a section on conducting night patrols, with diagrams given for a 10-man patrol moving in open country, down a road, and clearing an objective such as a house or small wood. The manual stressed the importance of rehearsals. Each man in the section was expected to focus attention in a specific direction so that a full 360-degree coverage could be observed by the men of the section. The manual suggested that 3-man reconnaissance patrols operate as part of a larger section-sized fighting patrol, which could be detached near its objective, but also rely on the firepower of the section if it became necessary. The manual further suggested that steel helmets and gas masks not be worn. Instead, wear what you like and carry any weapon you feel confident of using. It was common for men on patrol to carry as little as possible, and much of their personal equipment was left behind, particularly on short-duration patrols, to maximize each man's speed and stealth. Priority was placed on weapons and ammunition. Written reports facilitated the collection and interpretation of information gained. The battalion intelligence section gathered information and passed it on up to higher formations, which collated the information and attempted to assemble an integrated, high-level understanding of enemy strengths, identities, and intentions. As a 10-hour miniseries, Band of Brothers had the time to illustrate this aspect of patrolling in ways few other cultural depictions have been able to, and Captain Winters is shown at a typewriter, responding to multiple calls by his superiors for written reports.
Medical supplies, transport.
An inventory, yes, sir.
Dick,
Sir.
still waiting to write citations on that 5 October operation. I need your report.
The report, yes, sir.
Light a fire under it, Dick.
This example of a patrol report comes from the Korean War, but demonstrates the kind of reporting that was done. The patrol is identified and discussed in the Canadian Army's official history of the Korean War. The rapid advances of the first months of the conflict had ceased, and opposing troops of the Communist and United Nations forces occupied a front line, not unlike that of the First World War. Patrolling became the major activity of the units manning the line. The report is detailed, and a full page describes the attack of a Canadian infantry company across a river, which cost 1 man killed, 4 seriously wounded, and 24 minor wounds. The second page includes an analysis by the brigade intelligence officer. Items of interest include an attempt to explain anti-personnel explosions, for which no gun flash or report could be associated. 3 hypotheses were made. Analysis of the frequency and volume of enemy fire further led the intelligence officer to believe that troops of a newly arrived formation were fighting from well-constructed weapons pits. The official history noted that while fighting patrols such as this were common on that front at that time, the brigade patrol task tables, similar to the pro forma shown earlier, had remarkably few reconnaissance tasks. The historian concluded, lack of detailed information about the enemy's hour-to-hour routine, best provided by reconnaissance and lie-up patrols, must have made the planning of fighting, or more particularly, ambush patrols very difficult. 2 points here. Firstly, evidence that patrols were crucial for obtaining information which helped with future operations. Secondly, that fighting patrols could be further characterized. In this case, an ambush patrol was one designed to destroy an enemy patrol. Likewise, the term lie-up patrol refers to one in which a friendly force moves into no man's land and lies up or lies in wait either to observe or to engage enemy patrols. The official history went on to discuss what the Canadians called jitter patrols, designed to impact enemy morale by firing at them and perhaps getting them to reveal the positions of their weapons. Sometimes these so-called jitter patrols were also done to draw in enemy patrols into ambushes.
D Company Lieutenant Spears, patrol order.
Static fronts in the Second World War, where major combat operations had ground to a halt, were never completely devoid of military activities, and the men in the infantry companies were constantly employed in patrolling. As you have just seen, patrolling was more complicated than just walking into no man's land. Patrols, no matter how small, were generally integrated into battalion and higher formation plans, and information and practical results obtained on these patrols continually informed the planning of larger-scale operations.